So after I mentioned that I read 100 books last year, I've had a few people ask if I can make a video on how to read more. And I thought about it, and I do actually have quite a few tips on this. But before I get into those tips, I just have to say this would have never been possible years ago. When I was still in school, when I had, 6 different responsibilities to juggle, when I had a social life, I would not have been able to read as much as I do now. So please do not feel bad if you are not meeting the same amount of, Goodreads books as somebody else online, because everybody's lives and schedules look really different. And I remember 2 years ago, my goal was to read 12 books in a year, and I was really proud about that. You should still feel really proud for setting whatever goal is achievable for you. It doesn't have to be 100 like it is for me. Also, before I get into the tips, just a reminder, my second novel, A Song at Dead Man's Cove, a gothic horror novel set in coastal Washington, is set to release in June. Make sure you are subscribed to my email newsletter if you aren't already, so that you can be notified as soon as it's out, or as soon as you can pre-order. This is a gothic horror novel with dual timelines, one in the modern era, one in the Victorian era. It contains siren folklore, attachment psychology, the archetype of the engulfing mother. It's going to be really awesome. I think you guys will like it. With that out of the way, let's talk about how to read more without trying very hard. So first, I think we have to talk about when to actually find the time to read. So I'll tell you a few things that really maximize that for me. Number 1, replace your post-dinner TV watching or doom scrolling with reading instead. I've spoken on my psychology channel about how this completely changed my life. I used to watch TV after dinner, and as soon as I replaced that with reading, the amount of books that I could read magnified exponentially. It was more of a fun activity to do with my husband because it felt more active. My anxiety decreased because, again, it's more active, so you're not just sitting there letting yourself get taken up by intrusive thoughts. I don't even remember what it used to feel like. I had completely forgotten about this until I sat down to think about making this video. But for a while there, every night after dinner, I would just get this feeling of dread, just completely unprompted. And the one thing that nipped it in the bud was replacing TV watching with reading. I mean, it's always good to get less screen time, but like I said, there's something just more active about reading. You have to kind of concentrate on it a little harder. I think there's value to TV. That's a very valuable art form as well, but it is more passive. It is more like it's being spoon-fed to you rather than you needing to work for it. So if you do that, let's say that you have dinner around 6 or 7 p.m. and you go to bed really early like I do, then that immediately adds about 2 hours of reading every day. And let's say that you do that 6 days a week, because let's say one night a week is, movie night. That gives you 12 extra hours a week of reading. That's around 1 extra book a week. Times 52 weeks, that's 52 extra books that you are reading every year. So this makes a huge difference. Now, of course, if you're in school, if you have homework, or if you have, things that you need to do in the evenings, a social life, can't relate, but you then probably have less time in the evenings to spend on reading. And that's just kind of something you have to work around. The second tip I have is to read anytime you're in transit. Now, I can't read when I'm in a moving car or in a metro because I get motion sickness. But if you can, reading in transit to work adds maybe another hour per day. So that's another 5 hours per week if you're working in person. During road trips too, if you're not the driver and you don't get motion sickness like I do, you could read. But I don't do that because I don't commute to work, and like I said, I get motion sickness. So what I do instead is I read almost the entire plane ride or train ride while I'm traveling. So considering I go typically on about 1 trip per month. Depending on how far I'm going, that usually means I'll knock out another 1 to 2 books while traveling. Times 12 months, that means an extra 18 books per year. My third tip is to read more on weekends. This works for me because I temporarily live in a very remote part of a new country. So like I said, I don't have much of a social life right now. It's not my priority at this point in time. And so it may not be achievable for you if you have plenty of outings on weekends or if you're in school and you have homework. But I bet you probably can fit in just 2 hours of reading every morning or afternoon on Saturdays and Sundays, which would be an extra 4 hours of reading per week, which means another 17 books per year that you're reading. So all of that adds up to 52 books that you're reading after dinner, plus 18 books that you're reading while traveling, plus another 17 books that you're reading on the weekends, 87 books per year. So now you've figured out some extra pockets of time in your schedule where you could read, but how do you actually make sure that you do read during those times? Like I talk about in the Goal Getter course, the key to implementing a new habit is to make it as easy and enjoyable as possible so that it doesn't feel like a chore. So then my next set of tips is around avoiding a reading slump. One thing that helps me get excited about books is I have a short list TBR of books that I'm most excited for. And this isn't typically an official list. It's not something that I advertise anywhere, or it's not like an actual post-it note that I keep. It's more of like a mental list, and it's constantly shifting. So like if I'll get a new book that I'm really excited for, that might make it to the top of my list. And in the moment, I just pick the one that most calls to me, which helps me feel most excited in the moment when I'm starting a new book. Something else that helps me when I'm in a reading slump is alternating between fiction and nonfiction, because they're very different types of experiences. Again, this may not apply to everyone just because not everyone reads both, but if you do, like I do, then that can be really helpful. Something else that can get you out of a reading slump is to pick a really short book or novella, because you get that dopamine surge of like, oh, I finished a book, or I'm almost done with it. Even if I don't love it right now, the end is in sight. And it feels also like you're knocking out books even though you're in a reading slump. And eventually you find one that you're really excited for and the reading slump ends. Now, something that I don't do, but you probably should do, is DNF a book if you really hate it. I cannot DNF a book. I always finish books. Even if I hate it, I always at least skim them to the end. But there is value in simply saying, I hate this book. It's putting me in a reading slump. Let me put it aside and move on to something I'm excited for because time is short. And my next set of tips is about making the reading experience more rewarding for you. One thing that's super rewarding is checking off books towards your annual goal in Goodreads. It feels super satisfying to do that. Also makes it really easy to track how many books you're reading, which ones you're reading, how you're rating them, and it all makes you feel very accomplished. For nonfiction specifically, I like to journal the lessons that I learned from that book and to sort of apply it to my own life. So that way I'm getting more out of it. I'm getting more rewards out of reading nonfiction. Also, for me personally, books are a business investment if I end up making a video about them. So it's not just a $15 book and 12 hours of my life, but also a video that makes me $500. And for fiction specifically, I'm constantly very aware of the fact that reading fiction makes me a better writer, gives me better comp titles, gives me inspiration for my next novel, gives me a better understanding of the literary landscape. So in a sense, it is deeply rewarding, and I also see it as like part of my job that I need to do. Collecting books is also super rewarding. Books are the only thing I collect. I will not be made to feel bad about it. There's something so satisfying about watching my bookshelves expand over time and envisioning how huge of a library I'll have by the time I'm a crone, because it'll kind of be like a visual representation of all the wisdom I've accumulated in my life. Also get really in touch with why it's important for you to read, and then pay attention to those rewards that you're reaping. Does reading help you build better vocabulary or make you a better orator or writer because of it? Are you developing certain skills from nonfiction? Are you developing as a person? Are you becoming more empathic as a result of reading fiction? Are you using fiction as a coping mechanism or as a form of escapism? All of these are things that are to some extent rewarding. And then lastly, number 6, turn reading into a social or connection activity. Joining a book club can be kind of like having an accountability buddy for actually making sure that you're reading those books. I'm not big on that, but I like to read side by side with my husband, and we sometimes share things with each other that we're reading from our own books, and that can be kind of a cute way of sharing each other's lives with each other. Or you can even just add your friends on Goodreads and get really interested in each other's takes. Leave comments on each other's reviews and things like that. So there you have it, some tips for how to read more without trying very hard. How much are you currently reading, and how much would you like to read in the next year? Let me know in the comments down below. Hope you have a nice rest of your week, and I'll see you soon.